What's up, everybody? Just wanted to give a nice overview and video of our presentation we got coming up this Saturday at our coaches meeting, where we're talking about improving performance without the weight room. And I really wanted to do this just in case, one, you're not there on Saturday and you miss it, but two, it allows me to kind of go over some details and take my time to go through it. So, what are the three things we as coaches have zero control over, but have the largest impact on performance? So these three things are the foundation of life. So first is going to be sleep. We have got to shoot for 7 to 9 hours of sleep, us as coaches and especially our athletes. Now, I understand that a lot of our athletes are going to have pretty rough sleep schedules, not necessarily going to get those hours, but without that foundation of sleep, they are really going to struggle to perform. And a lot of health things can go wrong if we do not get that sleep. So make sure you're really preaching that in your practices. Next thing is going to be hydration. Okay, the water we take in. We will die first of dehydration than lack of food. So that's why that is second. Now, 80 to 100 ounces sounds like a lot. If I just have a regular water bottle, that's 5 to 6 water bottles a day. That's it. It's really not that much, and it's a very doable amount. So my big suggestion for the kids is what I tell them as soon as they get up, they get a glass of water. Okay, let's just say that that was 16 ounces. So with their breakfast, they got one. First two periods of the day, get at least one, so that's two. Next two is three. End of the day or end of the school day is four. Then they're going to go to practice. All right, so they're going to go to practice, then they need water after practice. So then there's another one, really, another two that evening maybe, and that should be good in hitting that number. And technically, they really need more because they lost the water from their sweat in practice, but really shooting again for that 4 to 5 before your practice, and they should be okay. And then obviously one or two after your practice. Okay, then nutrition. Man, this is always a fun conversation with our high school athletes, but first and foremost, since they're athletes, I believe that they need to be hammering protein. 20 to 30 grams a meal and then 10 to 15 in the snacks. Okay, that's really what we're shooting for. Then we're going to go fruits and vegetables and then whole grains. Now, if you're in a field and court sport, and all these athletes, they need this, but they exceptionally need carbs. Okay, because they're going to be burning through calories and carbs for these sports. And all I tell them, and I don't really get too specific, to be honest with you. I just tell them that make sure you're eating. I know what I'm eating when I'm looking at it. So like a piece of chicken, a ground beef steak, that type of stuff. I know what it is. So that's going to get our protein. I like to hit that first, and then we fill in with fruits, vegetables, and our grains, and that'll usually help as far as putting on weight and that type of deal. And if your kids really struggle with putting on weight, get those snacks in between your meals. Okay, that'll really help up that calorie amount. And I'm a huge fan of PB&Js and chocolate milk. So with that, what do we have direct control over in our programs? So these things are something that all of our coaches, myself included, we have complete control over during the week, and they've got a huge impact on performance. So there are 6 things that I'm going to talk about. First is our warm up. Man, we control that warm up every day, and I think that's a huge missing link in some of our programs and really performance in general, where we can take a huge advantage, get a huge advantage there. Then our daily and weekly practice layout. This is also massive because we want our weekly layout to build on itself. Okay, and again, I'll talk about that more. And then a daily layout as well. Make sure that your practice organization makes sense. So the other 4 things that we control is our tactical preparation, which is just game strategy. It's offense and defense, that type of stuff. Technical, which are the sport skills such as throwing, catching, passing, different things for your sport, whatever that may be. Psychological, which is our spiritual, emotional, and then cognitive abilities in our athletes. And really, we all influence that, but you guys as sport coaches can really drastically impact that stuff. And then the physical, which essentially is what I have a big part of, but you guys are also important when it comes to that, particularly the conditioning piece. So, what's the one thing we do every single day in season, no matter whether it's a practice or a game? We warm up. Every single day, we warm up. Okay, that's 10 to 15 minutes every single day. Now, our warm up and what I do with our athletes is I'm getting them ready to perform. Okay, so they're preparing to perform. And after that first week, teams typically go through the motions. And that's where I really want uh, for us to have, for the most part, a universal dynamic warm up where all of our teams are pretty much doing this with a little changes depending on the sport. Now, and if I asked you, man, if I had an extra hour of practice, would I take it? 100%. You guys would 100% take it. So why not take advantage of this 10 to 15 minutes and get a good training effect from it? So here's a sample of our prep work, of our warm up, as you would say. I don't typically say warm up just because I don't like it, and the kids usually when you say warm up, they're thinking let's go through the motions, that type of stuff. Where prep work, we're getting after it. So we're starting with the dynamic movement, which again, I've got stuff I do with the kids every single day, and they know what it is. But then I do change out different movements day to day depending on what we're doing. Then I want some sort of isometric, which just means a pause, where I'm holding these movements for 15 to 30 seconds, depending on what we're doing, just to get some blood flow, to get some strengthening, get a little bit of mobility work depending on what it is. But we're hitting those isos. Then we're going to do jump and speed prep, getting them explosive, getting them ready to play. And then we do our sprints, full out, full recovery sprints. And I'm going to go over some little details there as far as where do we set that up. So practice organization. So in other words, where do we lay out stuff in our practice day? So obviously first we do the warm up. Again, that's 10, 15 minutes there. We're going to sprint. So that's 1 to 3 sprints with full recovery. Now I typically just do 2. Like for example, with football, they're going to sprint twice. They sprint, they walk back, which takes about 60 seconds or so, and then they hit another sprint, and then we're on to practice. Now, the reason why we do this is because speed drops off if we don't train it in 5 days, plus or minus 3. So in other words, 3 to 8 days. Well, the lower your training age, so our high school kids, the sooner it drops off. So we want to touch it every day, somehow, some way in practice. 1 for speed development, but 2 for hamstring health. Okay, so then we're going to get into skill acquisition. So this is just our fundamental drills, catching, passing, throwing, whatever it may be. You learn best when you're fresh. So if you've got a new skill that you need to develop with your kids, this is the time to do it. And eventually we want to build this up into reactive drills, which just means they need to make a decision while we're doing these drills. Then we'll go into position groups. So this is going to be small-sided games, drills. So in other words, it could just be the forwards in soccer, midfield, whatever it may be, those types of drills. And then we also want to get a reactive component in there eventually. And then we can work the offense and defensive work. So again, that start of that's just 15 minutes, and it's a crucial 15 minutes to get your guys or your girls ready to perform for practice. And then that tactical and tactical preparation comes into play. Now, we don't have to do all 3 of those things in one day, the skill acquisition, position group, or team. It could just be a skill acquisition day, or it could just be you go skill acquisition and then you just go position groups, but you don't have to hit all 3. It can be whatever you need to do for the day. Okay, so then we're going into our weekly layout. So we've got our days dialed in. Now we're just going to go into the week. So all of our training weeks are based off of games. Okay, so we work backwards from our game day because the game day is the most stressful day of the week, and it's the most important day of the week at the end of the day. So every practice must have an emphasis. That means there's some sort of goal. So whether it's a bunch of live reps, game situations, reps with our fundamental skills, whatever it may be, there's got to be an emphasis because everything has a training effect. And it's really important that we are sending a clear message to our brain, to our body for the day. So the training week also builds on itself. So I'm building performance, I'm building recovery, and I'm building optimal learning. So here's just kind of 5 general practice themes to kind of get your brain flowing and rolling for ideas. So skill development, small field or position emphasis, in other words, kind of the micro of your game. full field or team emphasis, in other words, macro, the big concepts. You can do a mixture of small and full field, and then your scrimmage live, in other words, speed or refinement days. Now, I highlight that day because oftentimes that can be the day before a game, depending on what sport you are, because I want to see that they can execute at full speed when they're fresh, because that's going to closely correlate to whether or not they can do it in a game. So before I get into the weekly layouts, the detail of it, just want to break down daily load. So in other words, basically how hard is practice? So we break it off, for me, I break it off into 4 days. Low, medium, high, and then a speed day, which is basically such as for football, like their walkthrough, but we call it a speed day. So low days just means it is not super stressful, not much going on. Medium is right in the middle. It's going to be a little bit higher intensity, in other words, higher speeds, maybe a middle amount of reps, so medium to high. And then our high days are max speed, medium to high reps, could be high contact. So think of this like games and live stuff in our practice. So depending on what your sport is, these are all going to vary. So each sport is going to be different. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. What your category is for a high and hard day might be different for somebody else. But if it's closest to what a game is like, then that's going to be a high day. Where when it's kind of the opposite and we're nice and calm and relaxed, that's going to be our low day. So here's an example of multiple games in a week, what your practice layout can be. On Monday, if you do not play on a Monday, we like to use that day to get the rust off from the weekend if you didn't do anything. So that's a medium intensity day. It is not necessarily a bunch of full speed reps. Obviously, you're going to go full speed, but it's not going to be as many reps as you would, say, on a game day. Then on Tuesday, that would be our game day example. Max reps, max intensity. Wednesday is our low day, so think less speed, less intensity, with more reps in order to help promote blood flow, in order to help to recover the day after a game. Then Thursday, we're going to ramp up back up a little bit. This can be a speed day or it can be a medium intensity day, depending on what your belief is as a coach and where you need to be. And then Friday is our next game. Now, you could flip this around with our game being on Thursday instead of Friday, and you would just go high, low on Wednesday, and then Friday is another high day, with then Thursday being another low or medium day going into the weekend. Now, the key reason I mentioned this low day on Wednesday is for us in our situation, that's a shorter practice day anyway, and it's a shorter day in the weight room. It's going to be a recovery day, and I'll get into that here more, but that day is going to help you set up your week. Because what I'm trying to do here is the game day is always a training effect. So I need to recover from that game, get ourselves ramped back up, and now we're ready to go for the next day. You know, if I quote unquote win a practice on Thursday, that doesn't matter if it doesn't get me prepared and recovered to perform on Fridays. I'm not saying you can't work hard, but you got to be smart about your total loads. Okay, so 1 day a week, and this is essentially football, and this is something I've talked about with them in detail. Again, medium day. Their hardest day of the week is Tuesday. That's full contact, full pads. Wednesday is a medium to low. So for them, that's more an offensive day. Friday is a speed day, so we're full speed reps with full recovery. Think of this like a confidence building day, and then we're good to go on Friday night. And then for several of our sports, we can run what's called a high-low model, and this is for our explosive sports with high rest in between reps. So think of this like our track throwers, our sprinters, their jumpers, that type of stuff. I'd even consider uh, volleyball could potentially be in this. It depends on how you look at it. You know, obviously volleyball's got a couple games a week, but you could also potentially follow a high-low style model. So this is just a low day on Monday to kind of brush off the weekend. High day, that means we're just going full speed, and then we just go back and forth up until our main event at the end of the week or whatever it may be. But I can talk more in depth in this if it relates to your sport. Now, why do I talk about weekly layout? Well, for me and what we do in training, every day has a purpose and it's going to align really well to your 2 day a week games, depending on what you got going on. So here's an example of an off season lifting schedule. So training wise, on Mondays, basically our power emphasis day. It's not max effort in terms of weight. The intensity isn't as high, but I'm getting the dust off from the weekend. It's also our jumping day. Tuesday is our big day of strength. Now, we're going to sprint here. We're going to probably deadlift here. I'm emphasizing strength on this day. Now, I do that because I'm expecting your Tuesday practice to be high intensity. Okay, so by doing that, I'm getting a huge training effect of max effort. So then on Wednesday, where I do mobility prehab, that type of stuff, you've got a low to medium practice so we can recover. So I've got a big stress on Tuesday, and then Wednesday we're going to recover from it. So then we're ready to go on Thursday again, speed and power. You got a medium practice or speed practice, depending on what your goals are. And then Friday for us in the off season is a huge strength volume day, particularly a volume day. And then if you do practice on Friday, say in the off season, it's another high intensity practice. Now, for those that are doing off season work, you're probably only practicing twice a week, which is totally fine. And you're probably going Tuesday, Thursday. And that's totally fine too. That still works out because no matter what, Friday is going to be a huge day because they get 2 days off. So it's not a big deal if you go Tuesday, Thursday, but this aligns really well to our typical in season. Now, once we get in season and you've got games, this is where we adjust a little bit. Monday is still going to be a power day, and yes, there are some games that day, and we can adjust. And I adjust the sets and reps that they do on Mondays with games. So let's say they play Tuesday, they're going to do a primer lift. Again, I'm adjusting sets and reps. Wednesday, we don't have games on Wednesdays, so it's our big recovery day for the week. Thursday, again, speed power, medium or speed practice if you don't have a game, and then another primer lift for our game on Friday. So again, we're aligning with what we want during the week and on our game day, because these speed and power days that we have before the game, those are setting ourselves up to be successful in the game. It's setting ourselves up to be more explosive and more fast, even though it's not a good way to say it, but we're going to say more fast. So I'm going to ask you this. Would you rather win the first 2 weeks of preseason, or would you rather win the first 2 weeks of games? I think we all know the answer to that. So, as we come into fall sports and as we continue to go through our year, but particularly fall sports and winter sports, the first week of practice is going to be your most important week of the season. That's going to have the biggest impact on whether your athletes are ready to play week one. So, like I just said, it determines if you're ready to perform the first game. My suggestion for you is day one, start at 70% of your total practice time. Quite frankly, I would say 50%, but I know you guys are going to really struggle to want to do that. So 70%, which if you typically go 2 hours, that's 80 to 90 minutes. Now, I say that because these athletes aren't as physically ready as we think they are when we're going into the season. Yes, if they've been to summer training, they're going to be pretty dialed and ready to go, but you've got some that haven't come. And then as you go into winter, that fall to winter transition is the hardest of the year. So here in Florida, all of our fall sports of football, volleyball, cheer, cross country is the exception there, and we have swimming. Those sports are all predominantly explosive sports with rest, where our winter sports are in the middle ground. They're glycolytic, just meaning they are high intensity repeat sports. So man, they are going to be out of shape. Their fitness level isn't going to be ready for those sports when we go. So it's super important that you start off slow that first week, particularly for those fall sport athletes. Now, if they haven't been doing anything in the fall and they've been with you training, then obviously they're going to be fine when you start that winter sport. So then we're going to arrange the week as we already talked about, low, medium, and high days, and I'm going to show you the 4-week buildup that I suggest that we do. So with our 4-week build-up, what I want you to look at here is week 1. This week really sets us up for success the next few weeks. Now, all I ask is that on the first few days, you're cutting your practice time, especially the first day. Just asking for like 90 minutes of practice. Here's why. As a coach, you're going to be fired up and you're going to be excited. Your players are going to be nervous, excited, amped up. That low practice, quote unquote, for 90 minutes, I promise you, is probably going to be just as hard as this 2-hour practice because everybody's going full bore and they're amped up. And I'm saying to cut your time like that because that's the easiest way to manage total load on how stressful the practice is. So start around 80 to 90 minutes, then bump it up a little bit more on Tuesday, 95 to 105. And then Wednesday, if you want to go 2 hours, cool, that's fine. And then come back down on Thursday to another 80 to 90 minutes, and then on Friday is another medium day. So in that whole week, you're going to go about 7.5 to 8.5 hours total practice, which is a ton of work that first week. You still got a lot of work done. Now, going into week 2, you've now got 2 high days. In other words, 2 hard days of practice. The only difference for the rest of the year in terms of a quote-unquote hard practice is week 1. Week 1, I'm just gradually building up. So week 2, I'm going to do a 10% increase, all right, in total time. So instead of going about 7.5 to 8.5, we're now going 8.2 to 9 hours total practice time, which is a 10% increase. So it's not some massive amount. It's a little bit of time, so the kids aren't going to be wrecked, but they can handle it, most importantly. So Monday's a medium day, Tuesday's a high day, Wednesday's low, Thursday's medium, Friday is high. So 2 hard days. And again, it builds off each other, and it also aligns with what a lot of your game schedules are. So whether you're playing Tuesday or Thursday or Tuesday, Friday, and obviously sometimes you might have 3 games, nevertheless, you're preparing your kids for what they will typically see in season while also recovering and getting ready to perform. Week 3, 2 high days, and then a medium low, and then Friday, depending on what you want to do, a low medium because they got a couple of days off for the weekend. And let's say week 4 is your first week of games. We're now back to medium high, lows, and mediums, right? We're going through our week, and now you've got 9 full hours of time. And that's a 10% increase in load per week, and your team is going to be ready by week 4. And for the only sport that has real trouble with this is football, and it's only because it's really hard to play the game in practice as far as to match the loads, especially for a two-way player. Every other sport, man, I can just go out and play basketball and I'm going to be great. So we're not too worried about it. So my suggestion again, that first week is the one you need to adjust. But none of this matters if you mess up week 1 as far as the other weeks, because your kids are going to be struggling to recover from that huge jump in load in that week. So with that, where are we investing? So when I'm talking about building up our conditioning is really what I'm talking about, building up our fitness levels. Those type of deposits, our fitness deposits, increase over long term. It takes a long time. It takes 4 weeks. Where fatigue withdrawals, happen in the short term, happens in a week. The deposits are going to improve our performance and improve our ability to handle more volume. In other words, games. Whereas withdrawals, they are necessary, but I can very quickly fatigue my players if I do it too early. So I've got to build up enough in order to withdraw anything. Okay. Now, I'm just a guy coaching at SFCA in Fort Myers, Florida. So what do I know? Well, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. So why should you listen to me? Well, this guy named Matt Van Dyke, at the time he was with the University of Texas football team. He's now with the Houston Texans of the NFL. So that's pretty good. He is, in this presentation here, he's talking exactly what I'm talking about. Now, what they did is that they cut their first week in half in terms of days. And then their second week, they went all 6 days with a little bit more volume and a little bit more load the second week. And they built it up again until their game week. So that's all I'm asking you. Get the first week dialed in. Let the kids come out because again, those practices are going to be harder than what you think they are. And instead of thinking, man, we've got to win these first 2 weeks, let's win the first 2 weeks of games. Instead of the first 2 weeks of preseason, let's win the first 2 weeks of games. So with that, what's the best way to make sure your team is in shape for games? Play the sport, baby. Play the sport. And as I said earlier, the only sport that's really going to struggle with this in terms of preparation by game one is football players, but specifically a two-way football player. I cannot mimic 120 to 150, however many plays in a game they may get. Okay? I can do it for one-way players, but I can't do it for two-way. And everybody else, man, we can just pick up the sport and play, and they're going to be in shape. So before I kind of get any further in this, I want you to understand there are three energy systems. Okay, there's aerobic, glycolytic, and then ATP. So ATP is basically speed, power, strength. It's our peak outputs. Okay, and this lasts basically less than 15 seconds or 10 seconds, depending on who you are. Then there's glycolytic, which basically is just middle ground. It's our field and court sports. Okay, so glycolytic is our basketball, tennis, soccer, wrestling, that type of stuff. It's in that middle ground. So about 10 to 20 seconds of consistent effort. And then you've got aerobic, which is our endurance sports. So it lasts for 60 seconds up. So what are sports demands? It's really important to understand what your sport requires predominantly. So is it single effort, so less than 10 seconds? Is it high intensity repeat efforts, or is it long efforts or endurance? So you can see here your different sports. Now this is the predominant energy system that is used. Okay, so here is ATP, here is glycolytic, and then here is aerobic. Now, I'll preface saying that all these sports do need a good aerobic base, but it cannot be the predominant thing that we do. But everybody does need a certain level of fitness. So here's an example of what I can do and help you determine with your sports. Okay, what are football's demands? And I won't go through this, but we broke down the average time per play, time between plays, number of plays per drive, how long it takes to replenish ATP, in other words, that peak output, and then the two most important abilities or I should say repeat sprint ability, which is arguably the most important ability for football, and then needs of positions. So this is stuff that I can help you with your sport, but these are things that you need to do and know in order to make sure that your team is in shape. And really, there's two conditioning beliefs, in my opinion. There are high intensity and there's low intensity. So high intensity is you're trying to get your conditioning through more max effort sprints or more max outputs with full recovery or somewhat full recovery, and then more reps to get to the yardage needed. Or low intensity, so submax efforts such as jogging or not max intensity, incomplete recovery, and then less reps to get the yardage needed. Now, I tend to lean for what we do toward high intensity conditioning versus low intensity. Now, there are times for this and times and places and applications, and you can do a mixture. But when it comes to our training and what we do, I do believe in this because most of our sports need this. And then you guys, particularly the endurance and our field and court sports, they develop this just naturally through their sport. Now, as I said, a lot of the sports kind of naturally do it, and it's really important to understand just how many yards your athletes are covering. Now, we want to fill the right buckets. Here's some distances and examples of average yards covered in a game. So with football, and this is at the high school level, covering 5 to 8,000 yards in a practice. Whether it's that, and that's counting running, that's anywhere jogging back to drills, whatever it may be. So that's 2.85 to 4.5 miles in a practice of low intensity aerobic work. Then you've got basketball, 7 to 10,000 yards in a high school game. That's 4 to 6 miles in a game. Soccer, 7 to 10 miles, 12,000 to 17,000 yards. And then baseball, in a game. They're running 4,500 yards to 7,200 yards in practice, so 2.5 to 4 miles. So why do I throw these numbers out there? Well, it's basically to help show that those extra sprints or conditioning stuff at the end of practice, I would argue you don't need it, because if you're playing your sport, you are going to get the yardage you need. Okay, if you've already ran 7 to 10 miles in a practice, in a soccer practice, you don't need to run another X amount of 300s or laps around the field. You don't need to. Okay, it's not going to do any good. Instead, we got to think about what bucket needs to be filled. Now, depending on how you run your practice, you may be filling this bucket already, but sometimes we're not. So what bucket is that? It's max velocity. Okay, in a soccer game, I've got to sprint to a ball, but I've got to change direction, and I'm doing a lot of jogging. In a basketball game, same thing. I'm doing these quick cuts. I'm jogging up and down the court. They may or may not be hitting max velocity, but in basketball, I don't hit it so much. And the football, same thing. Some of your athletes are already getting max velocity from their practice, such as a wide receiver or a DB potentially. So it might be your linemen that need to touch max velocity, but it really just depends. And then baseball, we're getting all this aerobic work running forward and back, to our positions and coming back out. But really, baseball is just sprints and sprints, and you might only get one sprint a game because I fouled a ball off or hit a ball to second base and I'm trying to sprint to first base, and it's really not that far, but I need to get in that max velocity work. So make sure you're not filling and overflowing a bucket that is already filled. Instead, let's fill the one up that doesn't get a lot of work. So others in our last couple slides here, guys. The second no profit is accepted in his hometown slide is and this slide is from Zach DeShant from TCU at his presentation I watched recently of understand your game's demands, and then you guys, the sport coach, is going to make the practice demands. I need to understand both your game and practice demands, but most importantly, I need to understand what you're going to do in practice in order for me to better determine what they need to do in training. But I know that if you properly understand your game's demands, which I know that you do, but you're making your practice mimic those demands, then we're going to be great on training. I'm not worried about that. So we just need to make sure this stuff aligns. So last 3 slides here. My first suggestion, play the sport to get the team in shape. It's exactly what they need. It's 100% effort, 100% more engagement, and it's definitely 100% more fun for these kids versus lining up and doing a bunch of different extra sprints. Okay, this is your conditioning. It's just playing. Plus, I get more out of it. I'm working on my skills versus just running up and down a court, down a field, not really doing anything. Second suggestion is going to be have your deliberate warm-up. So be deliberate with it. Again, I've got one for you, and I'm happy to send it over if you would like it. Okay, what I don't want to see is a super long static stretch, and then all of a sudden I go out and play. Man, we've got to get them performed and ready to primed to be ready to perform as we go. And then lastly, the last 2 things, do not mess them up the first week. That first week of practice is massive to determining whether or not you're ready to go game 1. And I want to win the first 2 weeks of games, not the first 2 weeks of practice. Now, for your example, from that presentation I showed you earlier, when that Texas team practiced that full week 1, they'd never recovered from it, and they ran 16 miles an hour as a team on average. The next game, or the next year, they cut out those 3 days. They practiced half of that first week, and the average game speed for game 1 was 18 miles an hour. All because they were able to recover from it. Okay, TCU baseball, they ran 23 miles the first days of practice, so 8 miles a day. And that's, again, just from going back and forth, out to position, out to cages, whatever. And that's a lot of miles, right? So you're already getting a ton of mileage there. I don't need to do really anything extra. And then make sure you lay out your practice weeks. Work back from the games. I would love to help you with this. That's something I love doing, is helping you guys determine what is your best weekly layout. And plus, I can discuss what we do in the weight room and where it fits in your day. Again, if you've got any questions, please see me. I would love to help you with this and touch on a lot of these things.